It's Managed to Win podcast time again, and I want to welcome you back. We have a great podcast today with Ari Weinzweig of Zingerman's. And so this guy's famous. If you haven't heard of him, then you need to look him up. Great stuff. Before we dive in, just a mention of our sponsor, Habitly.com. Learn habits that are soft skills that help you develop stronger relationships. Learn humility, which we talk about on the podcast today, empathy, how to be a great leader, which we also talk about. And go to habitly.com, check it out. It's a great way to go. Today's episode with Ari is great. I mean, he has written some incredibly wise teachings on leadership and how to have a community. He talks about the ecosystem within your organization, how that affects other people in your community, and stretching out from there. Ari is a leader's leader. He comes from Ann Arbor, Michigan, but it started as just a 1,300 square foot deli. Now he's doing, I think, $65 million. But it's not about the success. It's about who you are and how you're living your life. You got to hear from Ari. Let's dive in. Ari, I am struck by so many things, so many questions to ask you. Really excited to have you on the show. But I'll start with an easy one. It's just like you just introduced your new pamphlet. You don't call them books, you call them pamphlets. And I think that relates to many other pieces of your teaching. The story of visioning at Zingerman's, 4 visions, 40 years, and a positive look towards the future. Besides this 40-year anniversary, what led you to write this new one? Because you've got such great writings out there already.
Well, thanks. I do have books and I have pamphlets. So the pamphlets I always say are like a single, when you release a single, when a musician puts a single out or an album out. So the books are like albums and the pamphlets are like singles. But what drove me to do it is just the visioning work, as you can see from the pamphlet. It's just been, I don't like to overstate things, but I mean, it's been so transformative for me and for the organization over the years. And it just seemed like the right time to do it. And also because we had rolled out our 2032 vision now as of a year ago. So that was coming out and just seemed like a good time to mark both the anniversary and also just to show where we're going in the future, because that's what visioning is the story of where we're going to be. So this is yes to the story of where we've come from, yes to the story of where we are today, and then showing that it isn't just a nice story of what happened, it's what's going to happen because of the process.
I love it. And there's so many aspects of what you've done and the beliefs that you've developed over the years that I love. But for those members of the audience who are not really familiar with your background,
Yep.
They may know the name, but not your background.
Yep.
What would you kind of give us that synopsis leading up to where you are today, and then sharing maybe a piece of this 2032 vision to give people an idea of how they can start to consider doing something similar with their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do my best to go quick, but I grew up in Chicago, which for those of you who aren't familiar with the geography of this part of the world is about a 4-hour drive to the west of Ann Arbor. I came to Ann Arbor to go to school at University of Michigan, which is not an uncommon story around these parts. I studied Russian history. I had a particular focus on anarchism. The University Grad Library has the largest anarchist collection in the country. I used to go up there pretty regularly and study. And after graduating with my history degree, there isn't really much you can do with a history degree except go get more degrees, which is what I was supposed to do, but I wasn't ready for that. And I did not have a vision when I graduated. In the context of the pamphlet, I had what David Whyte, Whyte, whose books and poems I really admire and appreciate. He calls it the via negativa. So some of the folks listening might have experienced this unwittingly or unintentionally in their own life, but it's where we're really not very clear at all on where we want to go, but we're incredibly clear on where we do not want to go. So I knew I did not want to go home. All due respect to my family, I just didn't want to get caught back up in where I had come from. And so I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I might as well stay here. Like, it seems okay. And one of my college roommates was waiting tables at a restaurant. And I had never worked in restaurants. I had no sense of business whatsoever. Everybody in my family were teachers, doctors, lawyers, dentists, et cetera. In fact, in the context of the big book that I did on beliefs, I actually, in hindsight, had very negative beliefs about business because at the time it seemed like mostly business did bad things to people, and nobody in my family was in it. So all I read was, news stories about General Motors or General Foods or whatever. It didn't seem that interesting. But anyway, I needed a job. I went in and applied for a job as a server, which is the position he had. They interviewed me and said they'd call me. They didn't call me. So I returned in a couple of weeks or so and reapplied as a busboy. And they once again said, sounds good, we'll call you. And once again, they didn't call me. So clearly the employment situation was radically different in that era than it is today, because I would have been hired in like 8 minutes today. But anyway, finally I went back again and I offered to do anything because I was running out of money, and they offered me a job washing dishes, and I didn't know you weren't supposed to want to wash dishes. So I just took it and started that day, and I really just lucked out. There's a book that I did on self-management, about managing ourselves. And right up front, there's a quote from Paul Goodman, the anarchist philosopher, poet, etc., from mid-20th century. And he said, having a vocation is like falling in love, and it works out. And I love that.
Hopefully.
And that's really what happened with me. I mean, it's just, I didn't intend to work with food. I didn't intend to be a leader. I didn't intend any of that. I just wanted to pay my rent and steer clear of the Chicago suburbs. And but I lucked out because I fell into a line of work that I love. I still cook every night at home. I get deep reward and purpose from the work, and then also into great people. So Paul Saginaw, who's been my partner in all this from the get-go, had been the bar manager at one of this restaurant group's other spots. And they had just promoted him to GM at this restaurant, and he had moved over, and he started the exact same day I did. So that's how I got going. And then I started to prep and line cook and manage kitchens. So anybody who's listening that's worked in restaurants, I'm all in my roots back of the house, so to speak. And Paul left about halfway through the 4-year stint that I did with that restaurant group, and went and opened a little fish market here in Ann Arbor, which is still one of the best in the country. He and I stayed friends. Fall of 81, actually, right about the time we're recording this, I decided it was time to move on. I've written quite a bit about it, but I would say in hindsight, I had what I now call a good job, but it wasn't good work. So it was perfectly pleasant. The pay was fine. The people were fine, but it wasn't good work, which is really what vocation or living purposefully, whatever it might be that you want to use to describe it, is. So I gave 2 months notice. I didn't know what was going to be next. It was just time in my gut. It was time to do something else. And Paul, not knowing I had given notice, called me like 2 days later. And he's like, dude, there's this building coming open near the fish market in Detroit where he had grown up. You could get really good deli food, and we could get it in Chicago, but you couldn't get it here in Ann Arbor. So we had chatted off and on about doing something, which of course is an endless conversation amongst restaurant people that they're going to open their own. Hardly any of them do, but we actually did. So somehow within a week, we decided we were going to open, and somehow 4.5 months later, we were open, which is now shocking since it could take 4 months to get a meeting set up when everybody's in town and not doing something. But anyway, we opened up March 15th, 1982 at Zingerman's Delicatessen. The original space was 1,300 square feet. And it was just me and Paul, and we had 2 employees and 25 sandwiches on the menu and 29 seats and a little bit of what we would now call specialty food, but at the time was mostly just called weird. Extra virgin olive oil has become fairly well accepted and known in the circles of the folks who I'm sure are listening now. But at the time, if I would tell a customer about we had extra virgin olive oil, the typical response was something like, extra virgin? How can that be? So it's the world. The food world's come a long way. We've come a long way, and I feel honored to be part of what we do today. So there you go.
I know it's a rabbit trail, Ari, but what is extra virgin? I mean, if you have virgin, how do you go beyond that? I see it. I bought it.
Technical,
but,
it's a technical classification that has to do with free oleic acidity of the olive oil, which doesn't mean anything per se in the technical context to the consumer. What it means, what's important is that you're getting very high quality, excellent flavor in the olive oil. So the technical classification is important, but there's a lot more to it. It's really just like wine. The region from which it comes, the olive variety that's used, the care and handling of the olives, the speed from the time it's picked to the time it's pressed, how the oil itself is handled, just like with wine. Now they're trying to keep the best oils away from oxygen so that they're in nitrogen filled tanks so that you don't have any contamination happening at all or erosion of the flavor. So there's quite a bit that goes into it. It's just like wine. You can get a $5 bottle of wine or you get a $500 bottle of wine.
Or more. And so, but let me go back to one of the things you brought up, and that is this anarchy piece, because I've seen that across parts of your writing. So a lot of people, when they hear the word anarchy, they're thinking of, armed people trying to take over a government or whatever it might be.
Yeah. That's the opposite.
So talk to me about this, because, and then I really want to dive into your thoughts on humility and really some stuff there. So,
okay, awesome. Yeah. Happy to. So the commonly held belief of anarchism is it's chaos, rock throwing, destruction. It's really the opposite of that. Have there been anarchists who threw rocks? Yes, of course. Am I judging them? No. But there's also, pick your category: Jewish people, Christian people, Muslim people, tall people, short people, white people, black people. All of them have behaved badly at some level. There's
totally agree.
So and anarchism, of all things, everybody gets to have their own definition. But for me, I studied it in school. I was drawn to a lot of the creative ideas around it, about human dignity, about believing everybody was equal, not in a flattening kind of way, but actually in a way that uplifts everybody and helps them to be themselves. Belief in involving people in running the organization of which they're a part and getting out of hierarchical thinking, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, when I graduated school and went to work in restaurants, that was the last thing on my mind. It wasn't anything I was paying any attention to. When early days of managing, I sort of tried leaving everybody alone, and what I would now say was naive belief that, they would just do the right thing. That, of course, didn't work out. So for many years, while I was reading Peter Drucker and Robert Greenleaf and all sorts of other great progressive leadership thinkers, I started to say to people that I viewed myself as a lapsed anarchist, because I still believed in it, but I had stopped practicing. And about, I don't know, it's probably 12 years ago now, I was working on part 1 of the Zingerman's Guide to Good Leading book series. And while I was working on it, at this point, I'd been speaking at business conferences for many years. And when I would give my personal history and I'd mention anarchism, most of the audience would sort of, snicker nervously and have no idea, like you said, rock throwing and chaos. And I just left it at that, because it wasn't the point of the talk, and it didn't really matter other than to get people paying attention a little bit. But anyway, while I was getting ready working on the book, I got asked to speak at the Jewish Studies Department at University of Michigan by Deborah Dash Moore, who has retired. In fact, I got a nice email from her this morning about the e-news that I do. But anyway, she asked me to come and speak there, and she really wanted to call the talk Rye Bread and Anarchism, because I had just written this long 10,000 word essay on the history of Jewish rye, and she knew I'd studied the anarchists, and she thought, oh, this will be a really great guy to get, come in and speak to Jewish studies. And so I said, sure, whatever, sounds great. And then when I got about 3 months out, I'm like, man, at business conferences, nobody even knows who the anarchists are. So I'm like the expert in the room, and it doesn't even come up. But now I'm going to go into the Jewish Studies Department where they actually study these people. I haven't looked at these books in 20 years. I'm going to look like an idiot. So I dug all my old books out, and I started to reread stuff that I had been, very into when I was in school. And it really blew my mind for 2 reasons. First, because unconsciously we had recreated so much of this in the best possible way. about human dignity, about not thinking hierarchically, about treating everybody with respect, regardless of their role, age, gender, race, whatever. So it was kind of like, wow, we actually did a lot of this. We didn't try to in an overt way, but it had happened. The other thing, and this is what really blew my mind, is how parallel so much of the thinking of early 20th century anarchists was to what's now called progressive business. And it's only because I'm weird enough to be reading like Jim Collins and Emma Goldman at the same time that it struck me. Nobody else was doing that. They're either reading Emma Goldman or they're reading Jim Collins, but ne'er the twain generally will meet. But things like self-organizing work teams, employee engagement, belonging, purpose, like this is all stuff that the anarchists that I study were really focused on. Higher levels of spiritual engagement, not about religion per se, but just honoring the human spirit, art, creativity. How do you help everybody become an artist? Like this is all stuff they were writing about en masse many times in pamphlets, per your earlier comment back in 1900. It's just a lot of them were going to jail for it, and now it's on the bestseller list.
Yeah, it's interesting. So basically, when you're talking about anarchy, you're talking about going against too much structure. You're talking about too much top-down management.
It's all about structure. It's just that the people who are part of the structure participate in creating the structure. So right. It's actually all about organization. It's just that the typical model would be you and I are the bosses. We go figure it out. Maybe we hire a consultant or we talk with the top 3 managers. Then we show up at the meeting and tell the other 300 people how they're going to do it. This is now well understood, whether you go through lean manufacturing work or you go through employee engagement. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, with all due respect to bosses, we don't really know what we're doing. We're all just trying to figure it out. And I don't mean we don't have insight or experience or wisdom to share, but so does the newest person we just hired, because they have beginner's mind and they're going to see stuff that I've long since lost track of 40 years down the road. So it's really about organizing the business or organizing if it's a nonprofit, it would be the same, but organizing the business in a way that involves the people who are in it in a structured, effective way that brings all those voices out into the room. And it gets out of hierarchical thinking, which is the implication that, like, I'm a better person because I'm the owner.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. And I love it when you talk about the new employee, because sometimes, like you said, they have this enthusiasm that, they will see things or think things. They may not be right, but they spark things in us. That's what I say when I'm encouraging people in a mentor-mentee relationship, that the mentor actually gets a lot out of it 100%. If they go into the relationship correctly, because this mentee is going to bring up things or rekindle what got them on fire for the work they're doing previously. It can be very positive. But looking a little bit farther down the road, so you've got all these people involved. How do you establish accountability and a system accountability that's respectful, but the boundaries are solid?
So it's a business, not we're not coming together for summer camp. So there's a number of things that we do. One is that we've been open book management for over 25 years now, I think. So this is a methodology that we learned and adapted from the book Great Game of Business from Jack Stack and the folks at Springfield Remanufacturing in Springfield, Missouri. So it's a methodology. I mean, it's a system, and it's around involving everybody in the business, at least the ones who are interested in running the numbers and managing the business. So, just speaking in general terms, because each department or one of our businesses might be a little bit different, but generally there might be a weekly hour-long huddle, quotes, where 20, 30, 40, 50 people from the business get together. It's not the accountant reading the numbers. Different people, in quotes, own different lines. So somebody has the responsibility for sales. Somebody might have a responsibility for customer service scores. Somebody might have a responsibility for cash. It's really like the scoreboard at let's say the Jumbotron, if you go to an NBA game. they don't tell you every single nuance of, I grew up in Chicago, like I said, so I'm a Michael Jordan fan. I'm sure there's someplace you could look up like Michael Jordan's 3-point shooting statistics in the last 2 minutes of road games. But you don't really need to know that if you went to the bathroom and you walked back into the stadium. Like, what you need to know is the score, how much time is left, maybe who's the top scorers, whatever. So by focusing on a scoreboard-like metric system, it allows us to, yes, anybody who wants to see what we spend on office supplies could look, but it's really not a big deal. Let's focus on, in our industry, food cost, labor cost. Let's focus on mistakes. Let's focus on customer service experience scores, et cetera. So the open book is one big piece. Another big piece is that we have what we call our training compact. This came out of the work of Maggie Bayless, who's the founding partner of ZingTrain, our training business, where we teach all our methodologies. And she developed this in, mid-90s. And this really was about getting the trainee to take responsibility for their own training, right? So in the old model, hierarchically, you're the trainer, I'm the trainee. It's all on you, dude. Like, you have to make me learn it. That's your job as the trainer. And Maggie pointed out what's incredibly obvious, which is you can't make anybody learn. So she set up a compact, which we've been using for almost 30 years now, and it's awesome. So it says, you as the trainer take total responsibility that I as the trainee will learn, and simultaneously I as the trainee am totally responsible for the effectiveness of the training.
No, I love that. I actually, a past friend of mine, Judd Boys, came up with something with written expectations that worked in a similar way. Mm-hmm. He actually came up with it with his wife. So he went to his wife one day and said, "Hey, I'd like you to write a list for me of what you want me to do to be the best husband in the world." And she goes, "Why?" And he goes, It's okay. I'll write a list for you of what I want you to do to be the best wife in the world." And she goes, "Oh, okay. Now I know what you're up to." Anyway, they exchanged lists, and then they went at it for 3 weeks. And then Judd thought he was knocking it out of the park. And he goes, "Hey, honey, how am I doing on my list?" And she goes, "Not very good." And he goes, "What are you talking about? I'm doing this, I'm doing that." She says, "You were doing that before. Those aren't my priorities." And he goes, oh, okay. Take back your list and put it in order of priority. And I'll do the same. And they then use that for like 20 years, including raising their girls. And then he brought it over to the business side, where a manager and their direct report, or two peers, or within a team, they don't just make assumptions about how they want each other to behave. They actually put it in writing and review it once in a while. So they're confirming that, hey, we're doing the things we need to do. So we're getting along well. This is meaningful to one another, and we're productive.
Absolutely. And for those of us who grew up in nice dysfunctional families like me, it's, we're quite adept at guessing what the other person wants, but it's really a million times easier to just say it. And in the spirit of the anarchist question, I mean, it's equity, right? So of course the trainer's in charge in a way, but the trainee has just as much power in that conversation. And in practice, they have it anyway, right? We've all trained people who were not interested in doing any learning. So in theory, you're the authority figure as the trainer, but at the end of the day, the trainee has the power to block you from making the training effective, or they have the power to make the training more effective than it's ever been. So we're telling people from day one, you have the power. Now, you don't get to just do what you want, just like I don't get to just do what I want, because we all need to do this collaboratively. Yeah. One other process that's a big thing for us that's in another pamphlet is what we call bottom line change. So this is our change method recipe. We teach it essentially to everybody, not on their first day, but through the various trainings, everybody learns this process. So if you have an idea of what you want to do, start the ball rolling. Now, you may not be the decision maker, but it doesn't mean you can't initiate the first couple steps of the process and engage with those who are the decision makers, et cetera. And so again, it's trying to put power in a more appropriately distributed way that the ecosystem is in balance, and it works. And there's accountability throughout. I mean, because in a typical model that's hierarchical, if you have a new employee and they're like, "Hey, David, I got this great idea. We should do this." Then they've given it to you, and now it's all on you. right? And either you're a bad boss because you didn't do it, but you already have enough work to do, right? So this is about, as I just wrote in the e-news I do every week a couple times, is about teaching everybody to lead. So if it's your third day and you go, hey, Ari, I got a great idea. I'm like, awesome, David, let me get you the bottom line change pamphlet. I'd like you to read this. And then I'm going to help you to start to draft a vision for what this might look like. And the ultimate decision might lie at the managers meeting or the partners group or whatever in our organizational construct. But the point is, it doesn't mean this new employee gets to just change it, but they need to learn what all of us need to learn as leaders. Like, you need to get people engaged. You want to gather expertise from those who you don't typically talk to. You want to make sure people are brought along and up to speed, right? So this could be teaching a 17-year-old who's been here 2 weeks how to start to think like a leader, but ultimately it's awesome for everybody.
Yeah. And just a question for the audience. So when you try to move forward with these ideas, do you find that many of them move forward and you kind of just roll them out, or do you kind of, pilot them in small pieces? Like,
we do both. Here's the reality. Like, if there's 20 new employees come with an idea and I throw that option to them, at least 10 will never do anything with it. Right. So if you have negative beliefs about employees, you would use that as evidence to say why it's not worth offering it to them. However, I'll just tell you, if I had 20 partners who had an idea and they know the process, 10 of them won't do anything with it either, just because whatever, we're all busy. We all have ideas that really sound good, but we decide later it's not worth the effort or whatever. So, and the point of the process is you figure out the answer to that question while you're doing the pre-work. Right. So it's just that the typical model, again, is the bosses retreat to the back room. If it was an employee suggestion, we sort of decide whether it's good enough or not. If we're really nice, we give them a $50 bill and we're like, nice job, honey, keep up the good work. But it's my opinion, it's very parental. What I want is to teach them how to lead, right? And leading's not tied to age. Leading's not tied, with all due respect to those of us with college degrees. You don't need one to learn to lead. It's not tied to anything other than learning to lead. And so if you can learn to lead with dignity and do a good job, then let's start teaching you. Even if you're 16, bussing tables 2 days a week, man, I want to start teaching you that from the get-go. So over the conversation that is engaged during the process, somebody might say, hey, why don't we try this in this department? There's only 8 people. It'll be a lot less risky. Somebody else might say, this is awesome. We really should roll this out organization-wide. So those things will emerge in the process.
Yeah, and what you're alluding to also is it doesn't relate to the position. So everyone should be a leader. And you think of, you like Michael Jordan. I mean, that was the Bulls had a great run. He was so exciting to watch. Oh, and I loved watching him. I've also loved the Warriors, Golden State Warriors, which is more in my area. But, when you think of a basketball team, there's 5 players there. They all have to be leaders, but some are leading from the front, some are leading from the back, some are leading from the side or the middle type of thing. But it's a collective group that respects one another. A lot of what you're talking about in your teachings about the respect. And this leads me to your talk, your comments on humility. So I was really struck by this because I think that, like you wrote in one of your things, so this goes back a little bit, I think, a humble or anarchistic inquiry into humility. And you said, while the world focuses on big headlines and dramatic confrontations, humility continues on quietly but meaningfully behind the scenes and away from the spotlight. And humility is subtle but significant. And so talk to me about your journey with humility.
Yeah, I have come to believe it's absolutely essential to any long-term, meaningful, holistic growth. And that's true for us as individuals. It's true for organizations. In the same way that we live in a society that's been raised with hierarchical beliefs, we've also been raised in a society where people are focusing on just what you read from that, the headlines, the superstar. And it's sending a message through the storytelling, of which the beliefs are interwoven, of course, that's what you should also aspire to. But the reality is it's not sustainable. The people who are living in egotistically driven ways, my opinion, my experience, may have a lot of money. They may get in the headlines for a while, but I've yet to meet one of them that was living, felt grounded within themselves, and was surrounded by really healthy, wonderful, mutually rewarding relationships. It just doesn't happen. Now, they got more money than I do. They're, in quotes, successful at many things, but it's just defining, as we define through back to the visioning, as we define through visioning what we want. Like if what you want is a lot of money and power, then it's awesome. But money's fine. I'm not averse to it. And having some power, of course, I'm the owner of the business. I'm not trying to plead like I'm the poor little victim in the corner, but having it in a way that is contributing positively to so many other people's lives, both in our organization and the community, through the writing to people all over the world, through Zingerman to people all over the world, to me is far more meaningful than the other stuff. And to be honest, I don't care about awards. I mean, it's nice PR, and the people who work here feel good if we get one, but I don't care. Like, I'm no better if we get it, and I'm no worse if we don't get it, right? And yet, the big stories to me are, I don't know, the act of generosity that might have happened on a movie set. It might have changed the life of a new employee that just had gotten hired. Like, that's an awesome story. But what we're going to hear about is the star and the co-star fighting, and how secret affair that's, it's like, it's so irrelevant to the world, but it's so easy to focus. It's distracting. And it takes us off our own pain and our own problems and our own opportunities. So I think humility is what allows us to stay grounded.
So you talk about humility, and how humility may be the key. And I'm using some words of my own because this isn't in what I got, but I think okay. You're saying this.
Humility dictates that you would have as good a perspective as me.
I appreciate that. Where you talk about humility may be a key or the key to rebuilding trust and mutual respect after centuries. You said 500 centuries, whatever the term is, length of time of, a lot of systematic cultural bias around race and other issues. And particularly now, where we seem to have just a growing number of people who come from dysfunctional families, who have wounds, whether they're emotional, physical, sexual, whatever they might be.
Yep.
And yet, and then they're becoming, it seems like they're becoming bullies, or using a bully pulpit to kind of move their agenda. And I really love what you're talking about, is if we can come back to humility and living in community with mutual respect and dignity, and what that could mean.
Yeah. So this is, again, interconnected with the anarchist stuff too, because it's really, if you have the belief that nobody's better and nobody's worse, then all of a sudden the game changes, right? So it doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter how famous you are. It doesn't matter how big your company is or how fancy your car is. You're no better than the person that we just fired last week. Now, you know more maybe about many things, but it still doesn't make you a better human being, right? So if one has been raised, as most of us were, me included, to think hierarchically, there's always a better and there's always a worse.
Yeah, it's a lot of spirit of comparison.
Absolutely. And so when I speak, which I'll bet now that I'm going to bring this up, you'll find you have the same experience. The questions come in. What's the most important thing? What's your biggest failure? What do you feel like is your biggest success? What are you most proud of? It's like, it's all hierarchy, and it's really not that helpful. So there's two beliefs that I talked about in the book that I believe they're fallacious, right? So one is the belief you can assign an identity from the outside to a group. And with all due respect, I don't understand when people get on stage and they're like, the American people want. It's like, I don't even agree with myself from yesterday, let alone some guy in Alaska that I never met. I'm not saying he has less important opinion, but like clearly we don't all agree. Like whatever side of whatever you're on, it's fairly obvious we don't all agree. So they're arguing over what the American people want. There's no American people. Like we share a commitment to something, but it doesn't mean we all have the same thing, right? So if you can assign an identity to a group and you believe in hierarchical thinking, then either my group's better than your group or your group's better than my group, because we can't be on par, right? And I realize like in sports, a tie, right, is anecdotally referred to as kissing your sister. Like it's like better than losing, but not really. And yet in an equitably arranged organization or society, that's what we want. So what we're trained, me included, growing up watching the Bulls and the Bears and whatever in Chicago, to be like, oh man, they tied, they suck. To now we're working hard to create equity, like they're incongruous, right? So if you start to really honor everybody as a unique individual, and that I can learn from everybody, and that there's potential in everybody, even somebody who's just released from incarceration, somebody who was fired from their last job, they still have potential to get into a better place. And then number two is that we're just not thinking hierarchically. So I don't need to be better than you for me to be good.
Yeah. So when we think of where we are today, and I realize as leaders, we really need to focus on our own people, our own company, and really making that the best it can be. And I think you've given incredible wisdom on your experience and how others can do that. If we also look out and we look at our communities, our states, our nation, how can humility play a role in healing our nation? And where do we need to balance that with some courage and boundaries to kind of rein in the bullies, to use that term, who seem to be running amok, almost like anarchy, but we've got these different anarchy bubbles.
Well, it's not anarchy,
but unhealthy.
The Crusades were not Christianity.
Okay. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Like the people who perpetrated 9/11 are not Islam.
Yeah.
And so, I guess what I would say, and I'm not claiming to have the answer, but humility is a big piece of the conversation, because if you're in a position of power and you think you know the answers, you're already not acting in a humble way. So humility would say, I don't really understand what you're saying, and I feel very frustrated, but tell me more. Let's try to work this out, because there's probably some wisdom in what everyone is saying. Humility would dictate you would never get up there and say you're great. That's for other people to say. It's not for me to say I'm great. I wouldn't even say I'm great. I'm just trying to live a good life and contribute positively to the people around me. I mean, so I think that what we do, my belief is that what we do in our businesses is the community, right? So I've written a lot about the idea of organization as ecosystem. It's a metaphor that's much more aligned with nature than machines or sports or war. If we are an ecosystem at Zingerman's, there's sub-ecosystems, of course, just like near your house. The bakehouse is a little different than the deli, is a little different than mail order. And then within the bakehouse, the bread department's got a little different culture than the pastry department. That's understandable, but essentially the culture, the vision, the values, the beliefs need to hold together in order for the organization to stay coherent. Our ecosystem does not exist in isolation. There's a saying in organic agriculture that the pesticides don't stop at the fence line, right? If you spray pesticide on your farm, and I live next door, there's no wall underground that keeps the pesticide over the period of months and years from just going into my soil too. It's the nature of how it's going to work. So if employees leave their workplace feeling angry, they leave their workplace feeling demeaned instead of treated with dignity. If they've learned that humility as weakness instead of strength, what are they going to take with them, right? So they take the anger home and their kid acts out. Now what happens, right? Then the kid takes the anger on. Now the kid goes to school. The teacher says something and the kid reacts like a politician denying. We're not going to get into politics. Reality, the kid denies it in school. Where did they learn? They didn't make it up by themselves, right? And so we're contributing, for better or worse, into the community, into the greater ecosystem. And I'm far more focused on what we do here at Zingerman's, what we do in our community here, than on any global fix, because I think the local, I'm all for it. If you got a global fix, let's go. But I think what I have most influence on is what we do here. And if people learn to treat each other with dignity here, they're not going to not do it when they go home. If people learn. Yeah.
Okay. So, by the way, I can talk religion and politics with people who totally disagree with me for hours and love it. Not in an argumentative way, but in a learning way, like what you're talking about. Yeah. So, so today, let's say you're a leader and you've got a company and you're listening to this podcast and all of a sudden you get a 2x4 across the forehead and you're like, oh man, I'm doing this totally wrong. We don't have any common values.
Yeah.
We have like silos where I've got, multiple, things popping up, which I also think, by the way, is what's happening in our nation, but we're going to stay away from the political side.
100%. Well, there's no shared vision.
Right.
There's opposing beliefs, and I've studied beliefs and wrote a 600-page book on it, which doesn't make me the world expert, but you don't have to be a genius to figure out if you believe opposite things and you don't believe you can figure it out together, it's not going to work.
Well, and when your focus is on what separates us and what instead of what we have in common,
correct,
you're never going to come together because you're being driven somehow. Anyway, but let's say you're this leader and you wake up. It's like, well, you get an epiphany and you're like, I'm doing this all wrong. I don't have any values. Where do you start? How do you now have all these people who don't trust you or don't trust each other. They're competing with one another. Now I'm talking about kind of an extreme situation, but even if it's partly this way, where is the starting point for you to kind of turn that ship? It's not going to be a light bulb, where you just turn the switch.
Yep. Well, let me say a couple things. So first of all, it's unlikely you're doing everything wrong or you wouldn't be on this podcast to even have an epiphany. So the first thing is to honor the good stuff that you've done, because there's nobody on this podcast that hasn't achieved a lot. I mean, it's just the reality. And even if that's surviving 2 bankruptcies, it's not easy to do. And it's still a credit to your emotional resilience and to your commitment to learning that you're even on this podcast if you had 2 bankruptcies, right? So it's really first is getting regrounded. And even if you see the things, which I can certainly see about us too, that are not done well, to remember there's a lot of good. Number one. Number 2 is to remember that model of the ecosystem, right? So if I say, hey, David, man, my uncle's been farming out in, whatever, Iowa, and he's been farming like, totally commercial, a lot of pesticides, whatever, but he's given me this land and I really like you. And I know you like regenerative agriculture. I'm just going to give it to you.
Yeah.
You can't just show up. It's not the furniture and the scene behind you. You can't just call the movers and have it changed in a day. Like, it's years and years and years of work to rebuild that ecosystem. And that's not a criticism of my uncle. It's not, whatever. It's just the reality of working in nature is it takes a long time. So in the big picture, you need to rebuild the culture. Yes, you need to get clarity on your long-term vision. Yes, you need to get your values done, but you can't do it all in a week.
Yeah.
Right. In the same way that whatever's amiss in the country is, I don't care who gets elected to what, it's not going to be repaired in a week. This has taken decades and decades of dissonance and ineffective collaboration to get to where we are. We're not going to fix it in a month or even a year. And it's the same with the business. What are some starting points? One is to write a long-term vision. You started this by asking me about the new pamphlet. So the visioning process is a process that we have. It's very different than the business school version of vision. It's not a 5-line statement. It might, like our vision for 2032, which is in the pamphlet, is 10 pages long. It's the story of your life, either individually or collectively, at a particular point in the time in the future of your choosing. So for us, we picked 2032 because it'll put us at our 50-year organizational anniversary mark. So it describes what that future is like, right? So the vision is a good place to start because you're going to your team and instead of telling them what's wrong, which most of them won't want to hear, you're telling them in 5 years or 3 years or 10 years, here's what it's going to look like. And by sharing this positive, uplifting story, which talks about, in one element, how the people who work there feel about working there, it's far less intimidating than if I just go in and go, dude, all that furniture is going to go tomorrow. And we're changing the uniform and we're going to start working nights instead of days. Like, everybody's going to freak out. So the vision is a very good way to do it. That said, you can also start with the guiding principles. There's stuff in Zingerman's Guide to Good Leading Part 1 that I wrote, which is about the visioning process, about how to write guiding principles. Last year, we rolled out what we call our statement of beliefs. These are all available, by the way, I should say, on zingtrain.com or zingermanspress.com. So the statement of beliefs they're also, so guiding principles are beliefs, but they're really the ethical ones. It's the ones about whatever human dignity that we're not interested in working on. But the reality is, back to your story about your friend and his wife, there's beliefs that we have that are not ethical. Like, what time is a good time to get up in the morning and who's lazy? I'm not religious. I don't have kids. I've been in the food business 5 years. I live with a farmer. Sunday is the same as Wednesday. And I don't care about working Sunday anymore than I care about working Wednesday. It doesn't matter. But if you have kids, it's a different story, right? If you are religious and you go to church, it's a different story. So these are just beliefs, but we need to get commonly held ones so that when you come into the organization, we're not blindsiding you with something that you didn't know. So in ours, it talks about humility.
Yeah. And so with that humility thing, and also what I'm thinking, I think you're alluding to this, but I want to make certain we clarify for the audience that if you wake up and you realize, whoa, we're here, but we could be in a much better place. Mm-hmm. Moving with the visioning or the guiding principles, you're going to basically, as a leader, based on what you've said in the whole podcast, you're going to start down that path. You're going to create a framework. You're going to create some initial thoughts. You're going to create a draft and then bring it out to your team versus, hey, this is my vision and this is where we're going to go. You're going to get some input on it.
Yeah.
And then build it out from there, right?
That's absolutely how we would do it. I will suggest that a clear vision that's dictatorially imposed is better than no vision.
Because and you may have to you may have to start with certain components of it that are, you're not going to yield on. Yeah. Because you realize you've been unethical or not humble or whatever.
Yeah, I guess all I'm saying is if you're not interested in getting other people's opinions, then writing a vision that clearly says that and that describes the future you're pursuing is better than not having a vision. Because at least if you say it, then people can get on board or get off, whether, depending on their own priorities or whatever. Yeah. Here we always do it in a very inclusive way. So for just as one example, our organizational vision that I mentioned for 2032, I'm not saying others need to do it this way, but we make at Zingerman's Community of Businesses, which is now, a dozen businesses with 20 managing partners, et cetera, we make organization-wide decisions by consensus of the partners, right? But the 2032 vision is the consensus of the partners consulting with the rest of the organization. So the new delivery driver at the bakehouse is not part of the consensus, but their opinion matters, right? So in the end of the day, it's the partners deciding. You could say, whatever, Ed managed to win. David Russell's going to make all the decisions, but he's really interested in hearing from everybody else. Or you could say it's a vote. I mean, there's dozens of ways to do it, but the point is to be clear up front on how you're going to decide and whose perspectives you want to include. Here, we would opt to include as many as possible. in the belief that diversity dictates there's perspectives, wisdom, insight that everybody can contribute, even if they're not the final decision maker.
Yeah, and I would add that I don't think any particular way is perfect, as in flawless. So you kind of choose your route, and then you realize what you have to watch out for. As we close this out, Ari, because I want to be respectful of your time. To be candid with you, I don't want to say anything weird for you, but I had one brother. I feel like I found another brother, man. I mean, I would love to just sit with you and talk and spend more time. I'd love to go in and just work the counter at your store. I mean, I would. It would be just for me. I've had some clients in Ann Arbor area, and I've wanted to maybe get over there, but now I'm like, boy, if I could go over there, this would just be great. I could do that, like undercover boss, although I'm not the boss.
We have Zing-Train seminars. You could come for that, and we teach all this stuff. I teach the Zingerman's Experience seminar 2 days, and we go through a lot of this.
I'm sorry, but you may have to meet me in person, you poor guy. So
I look forward to it.
How do you want to close this out? You've mentioned some areas where people can learn more about your work, what you're doing. Oh, by the way, I noticed that you guys tell the story where, you tried traditional publishing route for the things that you write. And then you're like, that's not us. And I'm not an Amazon fan, but I do buy stuff on Amazon.
Yep.
So you want to talk about
almost
that
everybody
just for a
else
moment?
I know. Yeah. So yes, I did not enjoy the experience. Again, it's not a judgment of what others should do. It's just, for me, it's a lot of work to write. I really like it, but I didn't want to go do a lot of work and then do it in a way that was not rewarding, right? And so I make the choice. I'm not saying others should make the same one. I don't make my living off the writing. We have a business. So for me, it's far more preferable to write a book and put out a book where I feel good about the paper, the way that it looks, and the way that it's sold, than it is to sell 10 times more, make more money, but not like the way it's handled. And one of the key beliefs of anarchism, going back to that point of the conversation, is a big one for me, which is that the means that we use, so the way we do something, needs to be congruent with the ends that we're trying to achieve. The means need to be congruent with the ends. So yelling at people to give better service doesn't make any sense. Yelling at your kids to behave better makes sense from our emotional perspective, but it's not helpful because we're modeling the antithesis of what we're trying to encourage people to do. So for me, selling our books through a mass market that, in my mind, my opinion, doesn't support small business, that doesn't support the communities, it's just not helpful, right? And so we went back to basically what I would, in our industry, would say is the farm to table version of books. So we do them here. We do the work. I really write it all. We have people who edit, of course. We discuss things like line breaks and paragraph breaks and, the stuff that for me is cool part of the art, but that if you start to just deal with the big publishing house, you can get rid of all that. So for some people, they'd rather get rid of it. I'd rather work on it. And then we distribute them ourselves. So I think they're on Amazon, to your point, but they're more expensive on Amazon than they are here. The books are available on either Zingerman's Press, which is the moniker that we use to publish them, or Zing-Train, which is our training business. I will share my own email, which is ari@zingermans.com. People are welcome to reach out directly to me. And then I think you have it, so we could put it in the show notes, but I do an e-news every Wednesday afternoon, Eastern time, depending where people are. It'll obviously come out different time, but and people are welcome to sign up for that. Or if you can't figure that out, email me and I'll put you on the list. The one this week and the one last week were two different essays about why we want to treat everyone as a leader. So it's very apropos for our conversation today. So those are all resources. And then, of course, we sell food. So if people want to order mail order, we ship all over the country, zingermans.com. And we have a baking school where we teach baking classes. One of the 22 good things of the pandemic, there weren't that many, but one of them is that Zing-Train and Bake, our baking school, both ended up with online courses. So you can now take something about servant leadership or visioning from Australia or Andorra or Alaska, wherever you might be. We still love to have you in Ann Arbor in person, but if you're, living far away, I understand you're not going to fly from Anchorage to Ann Arbor for a 2-hour class. But anyways, so those are all resources.
Ari, everything's been great. Love to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here. Great tips for people. I encourage them to check out what you've got on your different websites. To be candid with you, I didn't buy any of your books or pamphlets yet because I want to talk with you first. But I'm about to go on a week-long vacation, so I'm going to go stock up. And I'm supposed to not look at my laptop that whole week. So it should be great to stock up and really dive into what you got, what you've written. So thank you so much.
I hope it's of help. Based on our parallel thinking today, I'm pretty sure it will. But again, I'm honored to be on, and my hope is to help contribute to the people that are listening. And my hope is that this is the beginning of many conversations, not just a one-off. And I'm not exaggerating that that's my email. People are welcome to reach out. The reality is I'm going to learn as much from you, David, or from anybody that's listening as they're going to learn from me. So thanks for the opportunity, and let's do it again.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you liked the episode with Ari, how could you not like that? I thought it was great. Leave us a comment, a rating, subscribe. We'd love to have you join us. Don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com. And stay tuned. We got more great guests coming. So bye for now.